Hello, it's Tyler Buchheit once again for Steiner Tractor Parts. In this video series, we're going to be rebuilding the brakes on our John Deere Waterloo built 2-cylinder tractor. Now, for today's job, we've got a 1951A that my grandfather bought new, and of course in 1951. It's been on the farm ever since. My dad loves to take it on tractor rides. In fact, so much that the tire tread on the front end is starting to wear off on some relatively new tires, I might add. That being said, we've got one brake that the brake lock was left on and it burnt the shoe up on the right hand side, and on the left hand side, if we hit our brake pedal at all, the brake locks up. Now I'll put in a little caveat that we've actually had these brakes apart when we first got the tractor back into the family a few years ago, and replaced some brake shoes and whatnot, but frankly it's been long enough that we forgot what all we've done. So we're going to be getting into that as we work through the video. Before we get started, for this project, I went all out. I'm tired of relining old, rusted, corroded brake shoes. Steiner now offers a complete brand new shoe with lining riveted on, ready to go. You don't have to worry about it not being tight. Things that you may have challenges or difficulties in if you go to re-rivet brake linings. It costs a few dollars more, but the peace of mind, the convenience, you've got to decide for yourself. So we've got, for this 51 Model A row crop tractor, we've got two sets of JD 3333, that's brake shoes for this model. We also ordered gaskets, so JDS 871 brake housing gaskets. And then to really make things nice, because I've done enough brake jobs to know, we ordered all new hardware, and that's two of a JDS 3513. And that's all new rollers, pins, actuators, springs, and so on, and some associated hardware. And these are all things that, a lot of times you'll get into your brakes and you'll find that these rollers and pins are frozen up. Often these adjuster pins are completely rusted into the housing. Those can be a challenge to get out. These cams, they get rusted and they should be free and moving as well. And if you've got broken or weak brake springs, your brakes pedal doesn't want to return. So we'll get into the tractor in just a bit. The idea is to make this safe. We want Dad to be on the tractor ride this summer and to be able to stop if he has to in a hurry, because let's just pick on something. Let's say the Ford broke down in front of him and he's got to put the brakes on, or otherwise he's going to be in a traffic citation for failure to yield. So we'll fix that problem before it happens. So what we've done to get to our brakes is, first, just anything you can take off to make it easier to access your brakes is a big plus. I will say, if you've got a tractor, unlike our A, which the brake shaft and the drum are riveted together, if you've got a tractor that's got a nut and washers out here, before you take anything off, you want to remove the nut and the lock washer and break that loose here. The later ones, the shaft is actually splined into the housing that's riveted to the brake drum, and you'll loosen up the nut, and then you'll need to take a hammer, a sledgehammer, and a block of wood and break the shaft loose from the drum. In this case, our drum, the shaft is actually attached to the brake drum that goes into our transmission, and the gear on the inside is what's holding us all in place. So we'll have to remove the housing. It's got 3 bolts, well, a couple bolts you'll find, and then probably usually a stud with a nut on it. Before we remove the brake from the tractor, we want to release the tension on our adjusters. So I think Alex had already done this earlier, but you're just going to screw the adjuster outward from the housing. So in this case, it's opposite. You're screwing it to where it's backing out of the housing. It just releases tension on our drums. For your models that have the nut on the outside of the drum, it's really critical that you do this, because if your shoe was worn into the brake drum, there'll be an unused edge that'll actually hold the shoe in place. So you've got to back these off to even have a chance to get the drum off on those models. But it's nice to do it here because everything's tight, it's in place, it's holding it just like a vise would. This is a 7/16 adjuster, or in our case, when you can't find a 7/16, because, hey, that's the real world in our antique tractor shop. 11 millimeter works pretty well also. So we're going to do that. We've already adjusted the adjusters outward. That's done. We've loosened up our platform screws, which are top quality, but they were loose, so we'll be reusing those. And our goal is to get this platform off so we can get good access to our bolts below. So we've gotten our platform off, and that's another reason why you've got to also loosen up the adjusters to let the pedals go all the way down. For this late Model A, we were able to pick the brake latches up and just kind of pick the platform up and slide it to the left. Or you could have done the right as well. Depending on the model tractor, there are instances where you may have to remove the battery box to take the platform off. And if you're good at working in confined spaces, or it's the night before the tractor parade and you're working on your brakes, you just don't want to take your battery box off, you can leave your platform on. So we're going to go ahead and remove all the bolts. There's 3 that hold it on, and we'll go ahead and pull our brakes out. You can kind of see this is our brake that likes to lock up. When you push the brake down, it locks up solid. So we'll have to check that out. And our other drum, as you can see, little forgetfulness when you leave the brake lock on. You're reminded that it was left on after the paint is burning and smoking. I did not do that, by the way. Just throw that out there. So we've gotten our brake shoes all loose, and obviously we've been into these before. Our gaskets were not caked on and baked on. Sometimes rust gets in here in the housings, and they can be a real challenge to remove the brake housing from the transmission housing. If you have to, you've got some surfaces to pry on to try to have one person pry and one person tap with a hammer. A pneumatic hammer works pretty well, or air hammer. Just take your time. Don't get in too big of a hurry. I see on this one we'll probably have to remove our step from the axle. There's pretty tight clearance here. There's a number of models that, depending upon the tractor, like on a 50 or 520 or 530, there's some very tight clearance between the drum itself and the bosses on the axle. So times you have to remove the bolts or studs and their nuts, steps, and so on to get at them. So we've got our brake drums housings off and on the workbench. Just note, you're going to have some gear lube on these. It'd be better if you let your tractor sit all night to let all the gear lube kind of drain back down the rear end transmission. We actually had to drive this tractor a little bit before we pulled it in the shop here today. So we got some oil to contend with. So what we've got is basically a cotter pin. Oh, well, did I say we worked on this before? I'm not sure that's the handiwork of anybody I recognize. Should have one of these. So cotter pin should be in there. So you remove that, or the wire, or the nail, or whatever you find in your tractor. And in our case, this is an 1 7/16, so we used an air impact and got it loose. If you don't have an air impact, you're probably going to have to put this in a vise and then lock and adjust your brake back tight and tighten your brake if possible. But air impact would be what I'd recommend. So in this case, we just simply pull our our drive gear off, the brake gear. And we always want to look at the surface here that rides inside of our inner bushing. It actually looks really good. There's not a lot of hours on this tractor, to be honest. Just really not a high use tractor. When it was new here on the farm, it only pulled a plow and a corn picker, and that was about it. It didn't do a lot of hay work or cultivator work. So in this case, because we've got our adjuster backed all the way out, we're going to go ahead and pull. We're going to lift this all the way up. Oh, look at those brake shoes. Don't they look nice? So I've got a little bit of binding. I'll have to probably get a hand from the videographer here, but this will give us a chance to look at our shoes, which our springs aren't broken. That's certainly a plus, but you'll notice our shoe is pretty dirty, so we'll have to contend with that. And this is the one that actually locked up on us, so obviously an oily brake shoe can lead to lockup in this case. appeared to be tight on there. I had to get a block of wood for this. So I had to come back over to my shop in Illinois where I have a pretty heavy duty Awatana puller, and it actually took quite a bit of force to loosen up the pinion from the brake shaft. So we got it loose and we'll work on taking it apart. We're going to change up our brake drums and shafts with ones off of a parts tractor that are in better shape, but they were a little rusty. So with some air tools and a little buffing wheel, we've got them looking like new. We decided because the grooves are not too deep, we're going to actually not worry about turning this brake drum. So get back in the shop, clean it up, and ready to install. So just a little trick I like to use when you're trying to twist a cotter pin and get the ends nice and right. Vice grips works perfect for this application, and another pair of pliers. And we just bend them around. And when you're setting a key like this, it's important to really bend the ends around, making sure that there's no play. My friend Marvin always said General George S. Patton, when he was in the Third Army in Germany in World War II, he said Patton always said that's how you have to make a cotter pin when you're done. You always have to make sure they're curled around. If your ends are too long, you should cut them off and make them curl around. You don't want the cotter pin to be able to slide back and forth. So we'll do that to all 4 of our brake shoes. And we've got these 2 ready to go on like so. There's a couple ways to do this. The way I like to do this is to install the springs all together. With the shoes prior to installation. So we'll start our springs through the holes in the shoes. And we'll install with our hooks on our springs facing downward. So this is how our shoe will be going on. I should also note, and this is pretty well self-explanatory, this pin is tapered to match the adjuster. Just something to be aware of. So this is take 2. About the easiest way, and my brother, my videographer, just reminded me, it's been a while since we've done one of these brakes, because a lot of times it's easier, the ends of this pin are lined up with these rollers, and it's kind of set up that they've got to fit just right. It's probably easier to get one brake shoe in the slot, like right here, and go to the other end with the roller, and you can kind of physically spread these apart and kind of get everything close to being in place. Taking care to hold this down, it's probably a lot easier doing a vise. So we've gotten our brake housing in a vise, which is a whole lot safer. We've gotten our one shoe on with the rollers engaged, which is not too difficult. This is the part that really stretches and gets pretty tight. So what we're going to do, wearing safety glasses, I recommend gloves, and a small pry bar or a screwdriver, and getting it close, then we just simply slide it here. Now our shoe naturally wants to slide away, that's why there's notches in the ends of the drum. So there we go, everything's in alignment here, and then we'll use this to adjust our shoe out when it's on the tractor. So there it is installed, and your pedal should spring back just like so. If it doesn't, probably have binding in your pedal shaft, just like it's supposed to be. Now we can reassemble with the drum and shaft and do the other side. So we've got our drum and shaft ready to go back in, and once again, this is a late model John Deere A. Other models are going to be similar, although a bit different. There's a shim washer provided in the hardware kit that goes down between the end of the drum or the hub and right here on the outer flange. Before we get started, I'm going to rub some grease in the housing, in the bushing, and then right here on this area, and some on the shaft as well. Always a good idea to start with everything lubricated properly. Okay. Now we're just going to turn this upside down and set it down. Just like so. Actually, before I drop that in, should also grease the inner bushing. Take care not to get grease in these holes. You want to make sure these holes are free, and any holes in your housing are free and clear from debris or whatnot, because oil from your transmission actually come up here and lube the bushing just from being slung up inside your transmission. So for this model, the pinion and inner is actually a sleeve. It slides down, it's a tapered sleeve. And somewhere is our nut and our washer. And we will simply tighten that up and we'll be ready to install this back on our tractor. So we're ready to install the brake assembly onto our tractor. We put our gasket on. This one's got a stud and a locating pin, both which hold the gasket in place. As always, I use my favorite aviation gasket sealer. This is available at Auto Parts or your favorite implement dealer. I guess we can install the platform from the other side. Pretty sure that'll work. Okay, it's a tight fit, and you'll notice that we'll have to turn our brake to get lined up. These brakes actually contact the bull gears that drive the axles. Okay, now all we got to do is put our bolts in and tighten them up. And we'll put our platform back on. Important to do that because you really can't get the platform on or off with the brakes installed on this model. You'll have to check. Each model's a little bit different. If we were working with, say, a 50 or 520, 530, 620, 730, any numbered series tractors, our drum would go on in a lot of cases after our assembly was back on the tractor. We'd actually bolt the assembly in place and then we can put our drum on. Personally, it's safer to install the drum on those models and have the assembly complete to go on. That way you don't risk pushing the brake shaft into the transmission housing and having to fish it back out or remove your brake housing from the tractor. So once we get these in, we'll get our bolts tightened up. Then we can go with our 7/16, or in this case 11mm wrench, and we're going to tighten our adjuster. And personally, I like to tighten these until you get about, I usually tighten them up until I notice more resistance on the adjuster. These go so easily when you just greased everything up. Okay, well, that feels pretty good. That's about a we'll say 3-inch travel. Basically, you want to tighten your brakes up to the point where they don't drag. So we can turn our drum and I can feel that there's no friction there. So we're still at about that 2.5, 3-inch mark. And with new shoes, you'll find that you will have to do some adjusting after you use them a little bit and let everything wear in together. It's about a 2-inch travel in the pedal. That's where I like to have mine set, so your brake locks work good. So no friction there. And the biggest thing is when we get it back together, get out, test drive, use the brakes, both forward and backward. Just make sure they feel good, and adjust them tighter or looser as necessary. So in this case, I think this one's adjusted. It's ready to go out for testing. We'll go ahead and get our platform on and our other brake on, and then we'll go for a test drive and see how our new brakes are doing. here's my dad on our 1951A. His dad, my grandfather Anton, bought it new in 51. We just put the brakes on it here for Steiner. Let's see if they do any good. And they're still a little soft. We'll probably have to adjust them and see if we can get them to grab a little bit. They do have to kind of seat in and brake in. Sounds like our brakes are good and working now. It's always good to test out your brakes both forward and backwards in direction, just to make sure everything's right. After you get them good and warm and use them a few times, you may have to readjust, and then you should be all set.